Hi, everybody. Welcome back. It's John Suntress here from Mainframe Comic Con and, of course, the Word Balloon Podcast. And very excited about my guest today. A big favorite of mine. We've been talking for about 15 years now. It's the former co-publisher of DC Comics, Dan DiDio. Dan.
Hey, John. How are you? Good to see you again, man. How's everything?
I'm doing all right, buddy. It's good to see you as well. And I'm very excited, man. You've got a cool seminar that you're going to be doing with Talent Talk.
Yep.
On the 15th at 8 p.m. Eastern?
Yes.
Tell us the nature of the talk, Dan.
You know, it's what we like to. It's really more of a meet and greet, and just to get a chance to have a conversation about comics with the fans that want to meet with me. You know, I've done a couple of these in the past. We do it for the Hero Initiative, which I think is a great cause. And for me, it's just a great way to still connect and hear what's going on, and give some insight and backstory that you could do in a much more personal setting than you would do rather in a large environment or on online presence, something like that. So I've done a couple of them. We've had a lot of fun. And it's great to continue on that thing, given everything else going on. We used to do dinners or lunches like this. So this was a great way to keep that whole thing going in the virtual setting and still be able to interact with the fans, which is what I enjoy probably most of all.
That's been one of the great, I think, hallmarks of your time in Comics, Dan, is promoting community. And that's something you brought right away when you were made executive editor of DC and really creating the DC Nation. And I know as a convention goer and a guy that's been covering comics, it's been a lot of fun. And truly, in this time of interactivity through social media and the like, I really think this is a positive thing that you've promoted throughout the years.
You know what? I love it. That's how I got into comics. You're going to remember when I was first reading comics and first going out, it's early 70s, mid 70s, and you had these very basement style conventions taking place. And it was the one place we can aggregate and talk about comics. Then when the stores came in, that conversation moved into the stores. And then as the conventions got bigger, you had got more exposed to more and more different types of books, and you get to meet the talent. And I just thought that was just such a great experience for me. And I remember so much of that. And I wanted to share that experience as soon as I got into DC, and that's something that I like to continue even now. What's fun to see what happened. I mean, with everything bad about the pandemic, I think one of the things that was most excited to see the focus returning back to the comic stores. And once the shops opened up again without conventions, they really became the gathering place again for all the fans to talk about books. And with all the bad news you get, what I've been hearing towards the back half of last year was actually a resurgence in interest in people coming through the stores and things in a very positive light. So it gives me hope for the future, and the fact that once everything seems to get back to whatever new normal might be, that comics will be as strong as ever.
Absolutely, man. And these are weird times, so it's great that you're connecting with the fans in this capacity as well. Dan, I want to point out. I mean, again. When did you start with DC? Back in '99?
Oh no, I started in January 2002. So
okay,
yeah, it would have been 19 years, man. I was in there for a little over 18 years, which is probably about 17 years more than I thought I was going to be there. So which was really good. So no complaints on that. But I started back at right after. And it was interesting because I came in the post 9/11 New York. And there was a lot of anxiety and anxiousness, and there was a sense of urgency, but also a determination to lift yourself out. And I'm feeling a lot of that same energy right now. And you're getting a sense of refocusing of what comics are, what they can be, what the potential is. And I think, like I said, I honestly believe the industry comes out stronger from all this.
The industry's in flux right now, Dan, and I think not only because of things that have happened with Diamond and certainly impacted by COVID. But certainly in the wake of your leaving DC, there's been a lot of changes as well. And I wonder if some of the initiatives that started while you were there were almost a direction pointer into where they are now. And I was wondering specifically about the Walmart initiative, these 100-page spectaculars that were anthologies, a front news story, and then a bunch of backups that were reprints. But I see now, moving forward in 2021, DC is kind of using that same model with several of their books, and I wonder if that really was kind of the blueprint of where we are now.
The logic was there is that if you really want to attract new audience, and that's always that's the holy grail. It's not just about maintaining the audience you have, but bring new readers in to refresh the plot. So if anybody leaves, you have new audience coming in. The problem was that at the price point the comics were at, the page count, the type of storytelling, it was very unattractive to new readers, meaning you're paying a lot of money for very little story. And if you're not really aware of what you're getting, it's a hard place to jump in on. It wasn't as simple as it was when books were back to being 25 cents or even $1. When you're paying $4 or $5 a book and you're not getting an incomplete story, it's a hard thing to really jump in and buy it in mass to really understand what you're purchasing. So the truth is, you want to get a bigger book at a better price point, give it more exposure, and something that was a complete thought, complete idea. And that's what we tried to do with the Walmart books. So what you're seeing now is you're starting to see comics get a little bit bigger, a lot more complete stories in them, maybe more high priced, but more value that comes with that higher price. So hopefully that might be a direction that does maintain the audience we have, but give a better chance for sampling too.
Is there a real concern right now, while you were there, in terms of where the monthly magazine was? I mean, as you say, it's the price points seem to be a difficulty, and maintaining really what was such a norm for 80 years of monthly comics and stuff, and where we're going now. And
I mean, look, honestly, if you think about it, you think how long that format has been unchanged. It only makes sense at some point it does need to revise itself, and you're seeing that. I mean, you're seeing that. You're seeing this almost a demarcation between the older style format, the more traditional 32 page periodical, being more of an older fans style of engagement with the material. The newer kids that are coming in, the younger readers are coming in, they're really looking for that smaller graphic novel size. That's a different style of package. And you're seeing age groups starting to basically pick product based upon the formatting and packaging. So I think packaging has a lot to do with it. But at the end of the day, everything comes down to content. Good content sells. And that's why you don't see much difference between selling in digital or in print, because ultimately the content's what's driving the purchasing.
Also too, the digital market obviously has certainly expanded in the last 10 or so years, and I wonder how much that has played into the dictating of pacing and really, I mean, God, we're seeing a lot on the digital side, especially at DC, a lot of one and dones or two-parters, rather than what was the norm in the last 20 years of the 5 or 6 chapter story.
Yeah, I mean, look, there was what was the old expression? Right for the trade. That expression, right. That used to be it. Everybody used to write for trade. They used to have an idea that may have been able to fill 2 or 3 issues, and now they were filling 6 in order to get the trade. I argue and say television's become that. You see a lot of these quote unquote seasons of television now that are on air that are 10 hours of TV that are actually probably about 4 hours worth of story, but they find a way to expand it out, much like the graphic novel did. So what we're seeing more and more is things that are shorter bites, easier to consume, easier to read in a digital format. So you're not there scrolling through page after page after page, but something that can be consumed in a much shorter period of time and still be rather fulfilling. So I think that's the stuff that works best in digital. I always equated digital really replacing more the magazine or newspaper style format than the comic book periodical format, because it's just 2 different styles of presentation of material.
Some of the innovations that you brought, Dan, both as executive editor and co-publisher, you were coming from television, and and I know that's something else that you're offering in terms of talking about with everybody. Sometimes people may forget you were a Saturday morning cartoon veteran.
I was responsible for the ABC Saturday morning lineup, 94 to 96. Which was kind of interesting, it's a different approach to things. But one of the things that we did bring over when I came over was really that I tried to get the weekly format. That was my thing, the presentation. If we were putting books out on a weekly schedule, then we should have new material on a weekly schedule too. And that was the birth of the 52 weekly series. We took a real animation style approach in regards to, working in a writer's pool to create material, as well as storyboarding things to hand out to multiple artists in order to meet the schedules on that. And I think it worked extraordinarily well, so well that we were able to replicate that about 4 times over on a weekly format.
Absolutely. No, 52 really was, I think, one of the brightest stars in your time as as executive editor and co-publisher, and it was
when I was ahead, right?
Listen, man. Hey, that was a hell of a feat. I mean, you got really, four of the top writers
Yeah.
together writing that: Jeff Johns, Greg Rucka, um,
Graham Morrison and Mark
Graham
Waid.
Morrison,
Yeah.
and Mark Waid. That's right, and
Yeah.
also Keith Giffen doing the breakdowns.
Oh, Keith was my enforcer. You don't know that. As the stories go, Keith would basically sit behind the scenes, going, "If you guys can't get it done, I'll just step in and do it for you. So it's up to you." And I never want to forget this, because we say that, but honestly, another huge contributor to that was J.G. Jones. He was the cover artist on that, but it was much more than just cover art. He was really telling a story on the covers that really helped to set the entire tone for the entire series. If you look at his covers, it was an incredible body of work, and even in some cases, he was present in a lot of the meetings, the writer meetings, and actually contributed and was sketching along the way, and actually drew different things that the writers actually lifted from his sketches and incorporated into the series. So this was this wonderful group of incredibly talented people working together. I used to call them the Unimind. They used to operate in this big thing, and it was a formidable body of work from a formidable group of people.
As you say, you had a few other times tried to replicate that in subsequent events, and
Yeah.
I mean, how do you figure out what worked with 52 and maybe what didn't work as well with, say, Countdown or some of the other weekly?
Yeah, what we tried to do. What was interesting about 52 is that they were able to find four very distinctive stories and found a way to weave them all together. And I think that was really strong. But if we were trying to create one narrative all the way through, we thought the second time through, we put one single writer at the top and feed it down to everybody else. And that didn't work nearly as well, because you really did need those different points of view to bring the variety and different sensibilities and different styles of stories to help it be engaging all the way through. So that was one of the things, and if you look at it then in the third way through, we actually went even more extreme, where we almost went with one single team, which was Kurt Busiek, Mark Bagley, I believe, when we did the Trinity weekly series. And that was trying to use an even smaller group of talent to manage the material. And that also worked better in some cases and worse in other areas. So everything had its plus and a minus. And then ultimately, the only way you could judge is by your enjoyment and engagement of the material that was created at the end of the day,
Yeah, well, you had some go-to creators, I think, over the years that I think were able to pull the trigger on some of your big ideas. And I wonder if you don't mind highlighting some of those.
Oh yeah, I mean, listen, as I always say, I wouldn't be anywhere at the start. It really was, it was Jeff Johns, Greg Rucker, and Judd Winnick. Those are my three guys. I mean, what was really fascinating, I say at the very early days of my career at DC, is between Judd, Jeff, and Greg. They had their fingerprints on over 13 DC titles, including all the primary characters and teams. So because of that, they were able to work together behind the scenes and really help cross over and drive the major storylines and set the groundwork for what ultimately would be moving out from there. And then you bring Grant Morrison into the mix, and this thing starts to explode. And then when I had people like Dave Gibbons, Bill Willingham, Gail Simone all come in really and help round things out. It was really, it was honestly, it was a great time. We were really extraordinarily focused and really driven with a common theme and a common sense. And it was like I said, for me, I don't know how I'd ever be able to replicate the energy and the excitement that we had probably from about 2004 to 2007. I literally call it from my windowing is really Brad Meltzer helped kick things off with Identity Crisis. Then we went into Countdown and Infinite Crisis, the miniseries, then the event, and then into 52. And for me, that was a really special time because we were kind of figuring it out as we were going, and there was an energy, there was a bravado that was there, and we took that same sense of what we were bringing to the storytellings and we brought it to the conventions, and we're out there pounding the table for people to pay notice, and there was a real upsurge. And I think one of the things I miss most in comics is that level of conversation on story, people really getting worked up and talking about the stories and what's happening and what's not happening. I think, if people are more excited about just first appearances because they think it's resale value or it's variant covers now, but not excited about the stories, I think that's a shame. because we should always be talking and arguing about what stories work and what stories don't, because that's what comics are about.
No question. Absolutely, man. No, I agree. And to be honest, I see that as an observer as a concern because it almost seemed like events. Would you say events were driven to promote better story? Because sometimes it felt like events were happening almost for the sake of an event, as an observer, and
Yeah.
and it seemed to detract from what should be focusing on each book and just telling really great stories within each given title.
Yeah, I mean, look, when you brought up, you brought up countdown to Final Crisis and going in there. The biggest concern was that we had enormous success, and the problem with success is that you have to replicate it and keep it going. So, what would have been right is to give more breathing space between 52 and Countdown to Final Crisis, and between Infinite Crisis and Final Crisis, so that you had a chance to reset and rebuild the line. But because you have this urgency to match a number or hit a level of success, some of the things started to compress. And what you're seeing now is it even being compressed even more. Now you can't even get just the simplest stories going in. You almost have to go from event to event to event. But what that does is weaken every event, because no event lands, no effect has lasting change, no effect affects the line, and you can see the ramifications play out for experienced time. So if the event doesn't play out and leave some level of ramification, then it really doesn't take hold as being an important event. The events that work best are the ones that you can see the implications of for an extended period. That's why Crisis of Infinite Earths works so well, is because you saw those implications last for a decade. And because of that, they seem to really matter, and therefore that gave that event even greater weight.
So, what is dictating this need for event to event? Is that honestly just a simple commercialism, and then really needing kind of a balance sheet from a corporate standpoint of profits in terms of utzing things and kind of making them happen versus playing the long game and letting stories kind of gestate and matter and impact?
It's profit, it's competition, it's the vagrancy of the fan base, meaning that ultimately the fans have a very interesting expression, which I always listen to, and it always makes me a little concerned, is that I only want to buy the stories that matter. You ever hear that expression? I'm only going to buy what matters. And when they say I'm only going to buy what matters, that means that they're making assumptions that if it's not tied to a big event or something major, it doesn't matter, because that's how they're making their purchasing choices. So ultimately, what you're forced to do is constantly force them what matters onto things until you reach a point where everything that matters starts to not matter anymore, and then you're caught in this loop of how do you break free of this trend? Is that you rely on it, and that's when variant covers start to pop up. Wait a minute, I'm not selling story anymore, so what do I got to sell? I got to sell more covers, and then I got to sell more covers on top of that, and then so how do we get out of this? How do we get out of this hamster wheel, so to speak? It's constantly spinning, and it's a tough thing to do, considering that you're producing this incredible volume of material on a monthly, yearly basis. I mean, if you look at it and you look at the number of books, we had peak spots where you might be putting out 100 books a month, and you might be putting over 1,000 to 1,100 books out a year. That's a lot of material that people have to consume, and a lot of things that have to try to matter and ultimately don't. And that's difficult and becomes disappointing sometimes. And you got to figure out how do you get out of that loop while you're still creating. It's, as the expression goes, you're trying to change the wheels on a car that's traveling at 100 miles an hour, and it's tough to do.
Absolutely, man. Well, now, you had an event during your run that I don't know if it mattered or not, but I thought it really caused a lot of excitement, and that was Wednesday's Comics. And really bringing back the comic strip format to comic books, and doing it in that way that really kind of was a surprise, and I think very successful from a storytelling standpoint. So tell us about Wednesday's Comics. How that all came about.
Yeah, okay. First of all, that's 100% credit goes to Mark Chiarello as the editor of that. And Mark is as an art director of DC. During my period of time, he was essential to me. I understood story and character, and Mark was able to take what was in my head, I thought visually, and was able to create it and honestly make it even better. And he was an incredible editor, trained by Archie Goodwin, who was an incredible editor. And had such a great, clear vision of things, and very particular. If you look at Mark's history, I don't know how many people know or don't know, he was the one who helped originally construct the Hush miniseries. It was going to be outside the line, much like the Loeb Sale books, and it was Jim that pushed it into Batman and made it a Batman book. But Mark did that. Mark shepherded through a lot of the Darwin Cook material, New Frontier, Solo, and Wednesday Comics was one of his passions. And so for me, it was really an interesting undertaking. And Paul, we had to convince Paul Levitz to get behind it, and he did. And I think creatively it exceeded all our expectations, because it was really challenging to create those one-page standalone stories. And I was so happy when Mark invited me to join and be part of that. I was a last-minute addition to the team because one of the other talents had to drop out last minute. So, and it was great because I said, I don't know if I want to do it. And I said, I'll do it if it's Metal Men. He goes, what if you do Metal Men with Garcia Lopez and Kevin Nolan? And I'm like, duh. I only have one great regret over Wednesday Comics. And the great regret is that I desperately wanted to own a Garcia Lopez, Kevin Nolan Metal Men page, and desperately, but I didn't want to ask in advance until we finished the run of the series. So I turned in my final script. The final page comes in, and I call him up. I said, Jose, I would love to buy one of your pages. He goes, I'm sorry, Dan, they're already sold. And I'm like, I missed out on every one of those Garcia Lopez pages, and they were beautiful, just beautiful.
Absolutely, man. No, and go ahead. I didn't.
I was going to say, but a secret story on that is that actually I was originally going to do the series with Ian Churchill to start, and Ian unfortunately wasn't able to complete it. But I've got Ian's first page, so at least I got something that has to do with Wednesday Comics, even if it wasn't one of the published ones. So that's
really awesome. That's cool. And honestly, Dan, it's funny you mentioned Metal Men. That's one of the last books that you were working on over at DC, and I imagine how often did you get to indulge your own personal taste and go, oh, wait a minute, I got that one. Let me write that one.
Okay, I'll tell a story. See, first of all, for Metal Men, when you're working at DC, everybody always asks you what's your favorite characters, and you have to be, very diplomatic. Everyone's your favorite characters. No special in there. Metal Men were always my favorite. It was one of the things I enjoyed and loved the most. That's why I wrote it for that. And actually, my first interactions with DC is when I was working at ABC Children's Television, and I had developed Metal Men as an animated series. That series was greenlit and ready to go. The only reason why it didn't happen is because Disney bought ABC, and all of our development was pushed aside to make way for a Disney product. Which was disappointing, because I actually had developed Metal Men as an animated series, and we had it was going to be a block. It was Metal Men and Thunder Agents. It was going to be an hour of cartoon for us on ABC that I was working on. But anyway, so that was my first introduction to Jeanette Kahn. She brought me to the offices. So I always had this incredible love affair for Metal Men. I tried to get Metal Men when I worked at Mainframe Entertainment as a computer animated series, but wasn't able to secure the rights at the time because there was some talk of it possibly being a movie way back then. And I've always kept an eye on those characters, and it was something special. And I have to admit, when I wanted to do the series, I kept on asking other people to do it, but it never met what I wanted it to be. So I kind of just put it aside and kept putting it aside and putting it aside until finally, when it's interesting. When you're coming to the end of your run. I felt I was coming to the end of my run, and Metal Men was the one box I wanted to check, and I got to check it, which was great.
That's outstanding, man. That's cool. Yeah. Did you really feel like it was time to go? I mean, where you thought
it's hard to say. You don't know when. You always want to write your own ending, and you don't know. And ultimately, everything's got to end at some point. There was a lot of transition taking place. A lot of people that I came up with were leaving. The people that brought me in were no longer there. When you're working with new management and things like that. So there's. I've been in the business and I've been corporate life for about 40 years. You sort of know when your time is right. And I knew it was coming to an end. It's, would I like to pick a different time? Maybe. Do I have any regrets? Absolutely no regrets. It's absolutely, I felt, great. I mean, honestly, 2020 was an interesting year for me. when you're running full speed for 18 years, you don't know how to slow down. And it took the entire world to slow down for me to be able to slow down, literally. So from that case, I was able to really be able to recalibrate, take care of yourself, so to speak, which is an important thing to do. And I'll tell you, man, it's 2021. I feel all fired up for it. I'm looking forward to what this year may bring. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I'm really interested from a creative standpoint. What you're thinking, how you're thinking about spending your time moving forward.
I'm still playing with a lot of things. To be truthful, I actually went back and I started to. I have a writing partner that I'm working with and on a couple of animated projects that we're developing out and should be taking out soon with any break. What I'm excited about. A couple of other things I'm mixing. I'm actually working with a company on a book, on the history of pulp. A little bit, so it's a little something there. I really can't talk that much about it.
Wow.
Yeah, there's something there. So I mean, it's like right now it's more about keeping myself busy, engaged, and involved, so I don't lose touch with the businesses. So I still talk to some of the retailers that I consider friends. I traded my entire DC office for comics, which I thought was kind of cool. This is a long story, but. So there's a lot of fun stuff going on there. And the other thing too is, like I said, is participating with Hero Initiative. Also, still working with the Cubert School. I'm amazed. I'm actually a little shocked at myself at how much I'm enjoying this, because I really tried to do a class that's rather eclectic, which is not what the school does. It's more about the business side. And as I call my students the bucket list babies. All these guys that had this idea. That they've always wanted to get out of them, and I'm trying to help them realize it, which is a lot of fun. Although I have to say, I got a couple of young kids in those classes, and that excites me even more to see that fire. Because boy, if any industry needs a young set of eyes, this is the one. So it's kind of fun to see them come up and be excited by it.
Absolutely, man. Well, and also that's a really important component if you really want to treat this as a career, is to understand the business side. And you've got a great perspective in terms of, how things get greenlit and maybe things that creators aren't thinking about.
Oh yeah, well, the funny part is the class. It's interesting because, again, I try to keep it as objective as possible on the projects that are people pitching, but you cannot help get subjective in regards to what works and doesn't work in regards to how they're pitching, because the questions that I'm asking them would be as I would have asked if somebody was pitching me. So therefore, I'm not asking them because I'm questioning their creative choices. I'm asking them to see whether or not it actually works in other medium, whether it does work as a publishing venture or an animated venture. And that's the class does. It could be anything, either or, and it's either creator owned or work for hire. But really, it's about how do you approach things professionally? Not that it's going to be this rubber stamp to say this is how a book gets approved or a show gets approved, but at least you get a chance to be seen and heard because you're presenting it in a professional, logical way.
Is your talk coming up on Friday the 15th for Talent Talk? Is that one of the components in terms of?
No, Talent Talk is just we just sit there. It's anything these guys who are in the room want to ask me about within reason, naturally. And if they ask me a question I can't answer, I won't. But I mean, I like to be as forthright as possible with the group and as honest as possible. I think that level of honesty about what the business is and what it's about is important. The other side that's important for me is just the comics themselves. I mean, you don't, it's the old expression, you don't really need to know how the sausage is made, but sometimes it's kind of fun. That was probably the one thing I did the most when I joined DC was find the backstories of all these things. You see how certain comics are made and how stories go and choices that are made, and you start to question them. And to get a chance to meet the creators when I first got there and to ask them about why they made certain choices in their books helped inform me on how to build out future storytelling, but also scratch that itch for me about things that I had read that I didn't understand why they happened. So that was a lot of fun.
Understood. Marvel has always done a great job of combining behind the scenes as well as telling the creative stories that they do. And honestly, again, with DC Nation, that was something that I think you really helped along on the DC side. But within the last 10 or 15 years and the way that television and film has developed, where do you think DC is in terms of the public perception of the fun behind the scenes stories as well as enjoying the characters?
I think everybody's a little tight right now, and I think everybody's got to loosen up. And they got to remember this is fun. That's every once in a while. It is pressure, and it is all consuming, and it is daunting at times. But that's why I loved going to shows. I used to say to people, I used to go to a show, and I could be beaten up and hateful and tired, and I go into a show and just that fan energy, I just fed off it, man. Just that interaction, that excitement, that light in people's eyes about the meeting the people that helped create their favorite characters and tell their favorite stories. People throw the word inspirational around a lot these days, and let me tell you, there's nothing more inspirational than meeting a fan and firing you up to make sure you're meeting the obligation you're making to them as a creator. And I think that's really important. I that's why you used to find me on the floor. I don't care. I want it to be accessible. If they hate me, tell me to my face. And you know what? You could say that, but I had rarely ever had a confrontational situation in person. And even the most angry fan was so respectful and so well, behaved, and such a great conversation. And and they realize this is an engagement. And all you got to do is just give them one or two pieces of the background just on the logic. And even if they still disagree, they appreciate that so much because at least they feel that their concerns were taken seriously enough to be explained to them. And that level of explanation goes miles for you. And I think builds that trust and belief and hope for if something's not working, I hope that we'll get better. We had this horrible expression at DC about the difference between a Marvel and a DC fan. And I don't know if I've ever verbalized this before. I've said this on the line, but what the hell, we can say it now. I used to say a Marvel fan would buy a book with the hope that it would get better, and a DC fan would drop a book with the fear it might get worse. And and if you know what I'm saying, you know what I'm saying.
I do.
And it was my job to flip that.
I understand. Well, and Dan, honestly, I agree with you. I think you were like a mayor of a good town in terms of the citizens of the DC Nation were able to go up to you and voice their concerns. But really, also, I guess what I was trying to get at, and I really appreciated your answer, but what I was wondering was, Marvel was always able to, there's the myth of the Marvel bullpen, and Stan and Jack and Ditko and all these great creators that created these characters. And it seems like the Marvel fans are really well versed in knowing, Steve Englehart did this with Doctor Strange. And I was wondering in terms of, again, in the 18 years that you've been at DC and what you've been able to observe as the characters have been exploited through television and film, if that backstory of the Gardner Foxes and the John Brooms and the Carmen Infantinos and those characters of the DC bullpen, if you will, has that education been passed on to this new generation of fans?
Yeah, I don't know if that education has. That's been a tough one because each one of the older editors and creators at DC were so entrenched in their styles, personalities, and individuality. So there was never that overarching theme, the overarching sensibility. And if you look back, I mean, realistically, DC Comics didn't have a voice. Even Carmine coming in could barely imitate what Stan was doing. And then when Jeanette comes in, she comes in with a different flair and a different sensibility, and she brings a different energy. And at that point, things are changing. But boom, 2 years into the job, she hits the implosion, and they get a little wobbly. And DC doesn't really start to find its true identity, I don't think, until Crisis on Infinite Earths, and then the birth of Vertigo with Karen Berger leading the charge. And then you start to see some of the personalities come alive. But if you think about it and you think DC, a couple of editors break out. Julie Schwartz breaks out in the early days at the advent of the Silver Age, and then really you look at Denny O'Neil really leading the charge and being the guy in charge of Batman for so long and really being the leader. And we used to always say that in some cases the Batman editor job was one of the most important jobs inside the building, if not the most important, because that's the one franchise that had to carry the water, so to speak, to everybody else.
No question, man. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but it's funny for me. Just going back to that, the funny part about it is what you're saying is that for me, if I was ever going to own one piece of art, I mean, like one piece of art. I forget the name of the story. I think it's Lo There Shall Be a Plot or something like that. It was a backup story in Fantastic Four Annual number 5, and it's the shot of Stan Lee in gear acting out a story with Jack drawing it feverishly in the corner and everybody else running for cover. And for me, that was what comics were to me. Even when I joined, even when I left, that is still what comics are to me. That manic, creative energy of a bunch of people in the room shouting ideas at each other, scrambling to get them done. And then at the end of the day, this book comes out that excites so many people, not knowing the insanity that was behind the scenes that got it made. That's comic books.
I hear you, man. No, and you're right. And then that kind of energy does translate to the page. And I think those best collaborations show evidence of that kind of energy. No, I'm totally with you, Dan. Absolutely. Yeah. So, like, do you think the corporate masters understand the importance of the publishing side of these comics as opposed to TV and film? Yeah, what the hell?
Listen, it's behooving to us to educate everybody, as many people who want to. There's a lot of people who want to be part of that. I worked very closely with Diane Nelson. She took extraordinary steps to understand the business, and that's what made working there so enjoyable. And everybody is going to approach that in their own way. And the good part about it is that hopefully there's new teams being created, new alliances, new explanations, new talent, refreshing. I mean, sort of what I was heading with when we talk about the idea of 5G, which was just a holding title, by the way. The idea of that was really to not just about story, but also how we created a story, who we created it with, how we promoted it, how we packaged it. It was a real complete reinvention. So you're seeing pieces of that take place right now, but I'm hoping that the crew that's there right now were able to really unite and really come up with a direction that's I have faith in the people. I always have faith. I think the characters are so strong that I think everybody gets sucked up in them and they help carry the day. So I think with the renewed interest in film and TV, I think that interest has to come back to the books again. Ultimately, it has to go back to the source. Comics always have to be the source. They cannot be. I said the last thing you want to do is turn the comics into licensed product. The last thing you want to do is make Batman the Roy Rogers comic, or the Jerry Lewis comic of DC. It's got to be the leader, and everybody else has to follow suit. And that's just how the paradigm works. And people might play with it and might think otherwise, but ultimately it will always reset to those schedules, that way of doing.
Have you been able to observe what Future State is doing with maybe some of those original 5G ideas and how they've either stayed the same or changed?
Yeah, no, I sat it out. I mean, I was really happy to see, I was really excited to see John Ridley in the Batman book. I'm really excited to see some of the names that we were talking to involved. I'm probably not reading the product because it really is part of what the creators are doing now, the teams that are there. So you got to give everybody their room to really invent and move things forward in the way that they feel most comfortable rather than what's being handed down, so to speak. So I'm excited to see what everybody comes up with. Probably not going to be reading it, probably not going to be purchasing it. Sort of moved on. It's one of the things that's I think people find most dramatic when I talk to them is how little anxiety I have being away from the creative. To be very perfectly honest, I needed a break, and when you take a break, you kind of take a break, And for me, it's more about trying to figure out new directions, new paths, new ideas, and give everybody else the room and the ability to really find their voices and find a new way to tell stories. That's what it's all about, man. I again, one of those jokes that's not a joke. I was joking that we were on our third darkening of Supergirl since we brought her back, and that was a little distressing. And it's like when you start to feel things recycling, it's time to get out of the way.
I understand. No, and it's funny. It's so weird to hear darkening of Supergirl, but I understand, Dan. And I mean, it's and I also understand the need to separate yourself after 18 years and really kind of find yourself again and move forward. No, it's believe me, I've had enough career turns myself.
Yeah,
That,
you know. I've been extraordinarily lucky. I had 20 years in TV, 20 years in TV, almost 20 years in comics. I mean, you couldn't have written a better story for yourself. And right now it's like I said, the world took a break, so I could take a break because I wouldn't know how to do it by myself. So thank you, everybody. It's interesting to see, and I'm hoping everybody comes out of this. It's been like I said, it was a rough, bad year. Just on the health and toll it took on people. And I know a lot of guys that the level of anxiety, of isolation, has been tough. And we've been trying to stay in touch with each other and lift each other up and support each other. And comics is a common language, it's something to talk about. It's, when you feel awkward, and you don't know when to call somebody or whether I should what's a good reason to call. Well, if a book came out, you could find a reason to call somebody and talk about the stories and talk about the ideas, what you like, what you don't like. And in doing so, you're reconnecting with folks. And you can do that over the phone. You can do it over Zoom. You could do it any way you want. But it's better than leaving each other alone. And we have this commonality that's been so strong for so many years. We should be using that as a base to stay in touch with each other and to build out and get stronger. And we don't have to just talk about the books. You can talk about the movies or anything else that's going on out there, because there's so much that comes from where we began. And that's the fun part, man.
I agree, man. And I'm really glad that you're doing these talent talks and getting together with people, because certainly, again, with COVID and the lack of live events and the chance to get together in person, here's an opportunity for people to get with you and have the fun conversations that we've enjoyed having with you over these 18 years.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, I was, like I said, I was in Jersey over the holidays, and I got a chance to visit one of my favorite stores, Zapp's Comics in Wayne. And, the guys there, the business was booming, and that just made my heart explode. You know what I mean? It's just so exciting. And he has people waiting outside to come into the store. And I'm like, hell yeah, man. Let's think about where we were when this thing started. We're out there crowdfunding and raising money and trying to find ways to keep the stores going. And then it's a great lot of retailers, man. These guys rolled up their sleeves, figured out how to do business when the store was closed, figured out how to do business when the store, limiting people come in there, when there wasn't getting proper delivery. Things are changing all around them, but they're not just selling the new books, they're selling the old books, they're selling the toys. I'm hearing Pokemon cards are selling again. What's next, Pogs? God, I mean, we're grabbing everything, man. I'm filling in old blank spots for my collection all over the place.
Dan, you're right, man. And truly, that has been the best thing to come out of this crazy, sad time is the response from everybody, publishers, retailers, and of course the readers, and everybody getting together and saying, no, we're not giving this up. In fact, we love this. And and I think it does kind of fuel our ability to face these tough times. And it's really great that everyone's kind of pulling together and make it happen and make it happen for the most important part, the stores that deliver these great entertainment to us every week.
There's nothing more enjoyable than reading. I mean, honestly. And when you have time on your hands, it's the best way to fill that time. We can sit here and talk about all these hours and all these streaming services. Nothing beats a good book, man. I'll tell you.
Right.
Nothing beats reading at your own pace and relaxing and enjoying it. And the fact that we're able to go out there and, listen, I'm at that point where I'm really just looking at just the completeness of things. And unfortunately, that involves my comic collection. So now I've been filling in these blanks that I've been talking about for 40 years. Now I'm not buying these books. And I can't tell you how enjoyable it's been to buy old stuff. There's been a couple of stores that have just been, they're like dealers to me, man. I tell you.
What have been some of the books that you've been able to check off that you finally grabbed?
I go into weird spots. The fun ones I'm getting right now are I'm filling in my Tales of the Unexpected collection of all my DC horror mystery books. I love those. I'm filling in some All-Star Westerns, but when I talked about the books, I've actually bought some I've actually got some really old Spider-Mans that have just been. I'm going to say something. Maybe you guys get this. You know, when you're a kid, there's certain things you just can never afford. And then you get older and you can't afford them, but you still have that mentality like, I still can't afford them. And then all of a sudden you realize you can, and you buy these things, and I mean, I feel buying an old Spider-Man felt like I was cheating on my wife in a weird way. Like I was buying something I really shouldn't be doing, you know? But but the pleasure, let me tell you.
That's outstanding, man. No, I'm glad, and truly, you're not alone. I mean, I for myself, I've been buying, of all things, Hot Wheels cars, and not like anything crazy
Exactly.
as far as rare, but just like anything that like is like a TV tie-in or a movie tie-in. Because I was a big Corgi car guy.
Yeah,
as a little kid.
I actually bought a bunch of old Corgis too. I bought the Avengers set, Steve and Mrs. Peel. I bought that one. That was a big get for me. No, I've been doing that. I bought the Marvel calendars from the 70s.
Oh, fantastic! Sure.
And then I finished my Amazing World of DC collection, and now I've been going back and buying old Fooms now. I don't know what's wrong with me. I really need to get out.
Dan, I don't blame you, and really, it's I think a very familiar story that a lot of fans can relate to. And there you go. And I'm sure on your Talent Talk, people are going to come up and go, "I've been doing the same thing, Dan." So I have no doubt about that.
It's a lot of fun.
Absolutely, it's going to be Friday the 15th, 8 p.m. Eastern time. A chance to have a great sit-down Q&A with Dan DiDio via Talent Talk. Dan, as always, I love talking to you. You know that, and it's thank you for always coming back and doing a new conversation.
I was going to say, we haven't done a talk in a long time, so this is a lot of fun, man. It's good to see you, and I'm glad to see you holding up well. And I'm wishing the same for everybody else out there, man. Hope everybody's hanging in there. There's a light at this end of this tunnel, and we're on our way, man. So it's good news. So good to see you, and hope to catch up soon for sure.
Absolutely, dude. Thanks a lot for joining me, and let's not make it years between our next conversation.
You got it, my friend. You got it.